Welcome to the Tuesday Weekend, the podcast for people who did their side work during service. I'm Josh Hobson, and today with us is Trae Durica, whose freezer always has ice cream. Howdy, Trae. How's it going in sunny Colorado?
It is way too sunny, and that hopefully will break soon this week, so we won't be, it'll still be ice cream weather, but it won't be terrifying.
Cool. And today, armed with viewpoints different than my own, Nick Parkin. Nick, how's usually sunny San Diego?
A little bit overcast. I could honestly compare Hurricane Hillary to the San Diego Padres as, wow, there's a whole lot going on there. And then you watch it and you're like, oh.
We were definitely at work last night anticipating the beginning of the real storm to hit about 8 o'clock. And yeah, it was a light rain out there. I was a little disappointed, but I am very pleased to introduce our first ever guest in the entire 6-episode history of the Tuesday Weekend podcast, Al Hart. Welcome, Al. Al has been a bartender for about 35 years and is an improv actor and teacher from Madison, Wisconsin. Al, how is sunny Wisconsin?
Very hot and humid this week. Yeah, it's supposed to be 100 degrees on Thursday. Yeah, it's been in the 90s the last couple days.
One of the reasons why my wife and I decided to leave beautiful Middle Tennessee is the soup weather. And I don't mean when it's nice and chilly out and you want to eat soup. I mean when it's 100-ish degrees with 90% plus humidity and outside is just gross. You step outside and you are just drenched in sweat. But anyway, my idea for this episode started years ago with a civil disagreement between me and a good bartender friend of mine as to what goes into an old fashioned. You see, I was born and went to college in Wisconsin, where the base liquor for that drink is brandy. This particular bartender was born and raised in Utah, where it is primarily known as a whiskey drink. So I feel I have the high ground here in two regards. Wisconsin is a drinking state, and this is their cocktail. Wisconsin consumes more brandy per year than any other state, and some estimates claim that Wisconsin annually consumes half the brandy in the world. And if you saw my Grandma Novak's liquor cabinet, you would know she did her part. Second, Utah is kind of known for the exact opposite of a drinking culture, but we can talk about metered pours and 3.2 beers in some future segment.
You might want to note that I've bartended all over the country, just like you've cooked all over the country.
I will also acknowledge that despite how some people feel, there are actually very good bars in Utah, and it is totally possible, however unlikely, to become an expert bartender there, even in the state's literal and figurative dry environment. So, normally in cases where I have disagreements with a bartender, especially about what goes into a drink, my first call is to Nick Parkin. Unfortunately for me today, Nick happens to be the bartender I'm disagreeing with. So I wanted to bring in a ringer of my own, some badger who would pour me a Christian Brothers or a Corbel without questioning my tastes. Al happens to bartend at a bar whose Friday night specials is the old fashioned, and Al has mixed thousands of them, kind of like the thousands and thousands of onions I have cut over my career. So thank you, Al, for joining us and being here to take the side of my upper Midwestern kin.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right. So we're going to get into the history of the drink. I want to hear a little bit from both sides about why each side is better. And for another first for this podcast, I'm going to have both bartenders walk me through their version so I can taste test for myself and see who's right. But before I get any further, there is one last thing I do want to point out, and that is that Trae is 9 years sober. Good job. Keep it up. And listeners, if sobriety is an issue you struggle with, feel free to join us next week. We will have plenty to talk about. With all that said, I am now going to turn the podcast over to our lecturer, Nick Parkin, for his grand and detailed history of how the old-fashioned came to be.
Well, basically, the old-fashioned is called that because it is one of the older accepted cocktails made. It's been around literally forever. It's super simple to make. It was considered a very high quality cocktail in its beginnings simply because of the oranges. Since most places getting oranges was kind of rare, you just didn't see them that much. So this was kind of the high society drink when it first came out back in late 1700s, early 1800s.
Is that like how pineapples used to be a decorative item just to show your status. You would rent a pineapple for your party just to show off that, you're fancy enough to have a pineapple.
Well, I mean, citrus fruit was fine and dandy and been brought back over from the New World, and they actually started growing it, and it was all over in Europe and everything, more or less. But oranges were sweet, so those were popular with everybody who had money, whereas lemons and limes were for all of us rudimentary folk who are, toiling in the soil, covered in soil. The first documented version of this drink actually came out in the Dr. Jerry Thomas Bartender's Guide, came out in 1887. This guy is the first person to sit down and catalog literally thousands of drinks. I mean, I've got it out right now. He's got like 20 pages of just punches that were popular at the time. But this is where I was directed to go to for my first old-fashioned recipe, or at least the original old-fashioned recipe. Now, this recipe is got all the components that myself and Alan use. We pretty much use the same thing. I will point out the old-fashioned is mixed with rye or bourbon, and then there's a brandy old-fashioned. So there's a distinctive difference in the book on which one is which, and there's the recipes are the same. Don't get me wrong. It's just brandy in this book, especially if you go through it, and I think you'll enjoy it, Alan. It's bourbon brandy, bourbon brandy, bourbon brandy. Those are the two highlights. That's what everybody was drinking back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That has come around for full circle to today, where when I first started bartending in the 90, when you made an old fashioned, it was the Wisconsin version pretty much. You had the big halftime soccer orange wedge, and then you'd throw in a couple maraschino cherries, put in a spoonful, and not bar spoons. It wasn't pretty precise back then, just a spoonful of sugar, muddle it up, add the bourbon or brandy, fill it with ice, top it with soda. They were awful. You'd make like one a year, two a year. That was it. And then the whole craft cocktail thing started rearing its ugly head late 90s, early 2000s. That's when people started researching and looking up old recipes like Jerry Thomas Bartender's Guide. The Savoy Cocktail Book also contains the same recipe. And it is my feelings that it is just a misread representation of the recipe that is the Wisconsin Old Fashioned, because there is soda in the original recipe. It says a thimbleful of soda or a thumb of soda, not an entire glass. When you make it the way the book says, with regular sugar, with the bitters, the orange and the cherry, you're muddling to get rid of the sugar. You add a thimbleful of soda because it works almost like an Alka-Seltzer. The soda combined with the bitters and the sugar actually bubbles up and dissolves the sugar more completely. So you don't have that nice little fun candy at the bottom of the glass, like when you're drinking Strawberry Quick when you're finished. I just believe people misread this and said, oh, soda. They didn't see the thimbleful of soda. It's like the emergency exit sign at my hotel where it says, do not open, alarm will sound, but above it says exit. And since that's the word people are looking for, that's the only word they see in that entire sentence. I do get a lot of people out here from Wisconsin. I'm in San Diego. Of course, people come out here, because even our hurricanes are the best weather in the damn country. I've had people from Wisconsin say, hey, can you make a Wisconsin? I'm like, can you make an old fashioned? I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, we're from Wisconsin. They will let me know they're from Wisconsin. I do appreciate that. And I'm like, I can make one of the trash cans you guys call Wisconsin old fashioned, or I can make how they're making them now. And I will make both and let them taste test for themselves. I will never refuse to make a drink how someone wants it. You can ask Josh about the time someone ordered an old fashioned from me in Park City, Utah, and him and our buddy Glenn were sitting there, and I asked them what kind of bourbon they wanted, and they both said together, Crown Royal. And apparently the look on my face was enough to make them fall out of their stools laughing.
Yeah.
So we are going to have some agreements and disagreements. I'm just saying that the current iteration is more closely related to the original version of the old fashioned versus what is made in Wisconsin now.
I seem to recall a story about the Corbell brothers in the 1893 Chicago-Columbia expedition bringing their, admittedly, California brandy to show off. And that is actually what really popularized the brandy version in the Midwest. Anytime I get to reference the 1893 Chicago-Columbia expedition, I will.
I could see you bringing that into the conversation. And that does make perfect sense. And again, as I said before, when you go through these historic books on cocktails, bourbon and brandy are neck and neck. Some places you got brandy cheap, some places you got bourbon cheap. Same thing, rye as well. A lot of these cocktails were transitioned over to rye during Prohibition because you weren't allowed to grow wheat or corn, so you couldn't make bourbon. But you could make all the rye you wanted for some reason.
Well, I think a lot has evolved just with personal personal preference and taste. I mean, you can make an old fashioned with almost anything brown. We make Southern Comfort old fashions and whiskey and bourbon, but fully 95% of them here are brandy.
No, I completely agree. And the brandy thing, that's kind of really the big kicker on it. I mean, I have to look for my bottle of brandy out here. It's just not something to use. I mean, a lot of people don't realize cognacs are brandy.
Right.
But they're only made in one certain region of France because France has monopolized making wines and everything they can think of in one region. And that's the only place it's real. Brandies aren't cognacs. Same reason. You can make them anywhere. Now, I haven't been in the brandy thing for a while, but I remember there's Corbel, there's Christian Brothers. And I did have a rep tell me one time that one was really big east of the Mississippi and one was really big west of the Mississippi. And I think the Corbel was the east one because I never really saw that one, but I'd always see Christian Brothers out here. That'd be like the to go to brandy, and pretty much every bar would be a bottle of Christian Brothers.
Yeah, no, I think I can count on one hand the number of times I've been asked for Christian Brothers. We pour, I mean, we stock cheap stuff, Rail Brandy and Corbel, and I always ask if they have a preference, and it's almost always Corbel.
No, I can totally see that, but like I said, I don't see that out here. In Utah, I didn't see it. Arizona, I didn't see it. Denver, I didn't see it. It was always Christian Brothers.
Yeah, I hear about it every time one of my friends or customers travels. They come back and go, "We went on vacation and we tried to order a drink and they didn't even have any brandy behind the bar." It's just not a thing unless, like you say, they probably have a Crevassier or some kind of cognac.
Yeah, Hennessy.
I was about to say Crevassier, though. Also, the thought, as soon as you said any brown liquor, my thought was a Fireball old fashioned, and then I threw up in my mouth a little bit. And
yeah, that'd be weird.
We'll move on.
So right now, you're going to see me and Alan both agreeing, like, Josh, stop it.
do not put that idea into anybody's head because somebody will order it.
All right, clearly that was too broad, to say anything brown. But like I said, there are other variations. Southern Comfort is reasonably popular.
I've had that requested as well as Southern Comfort Old Fashioned. And that's, again, out here, not a lot of bars have Southern Comfort anymore.
Well, and I could actually see like one of the honey style bourbons. Oh crap! And I'm now blanking. I could picture the bottle, and I'm blanking out the name. I put them a lot when I make eggnog because I like that little bit sweeter, note to it. But
I know, like the Bird Dog bourbons and stuff like that. They have like a little bit of a different, maybe berry flavor or sugar flavor to them. Secondarily, on the Southern Comfort, my restaurant job when I was there for like 5-6 years, had the same bottle of SoCo for 5-6 years, and we only had one, and we had 2 bars.
Wow.
As we are talking about cocktails, we need our guests to realize that there's been a huge kind of rollover on what people used to drink versus what people drink now. But those are the same people who used to drink these things, and that's what they want to drink from back then versus the new versions that they make now. So the younger generation knows one version of old fashioned. The older generation and everyone of any age in Wisconsin knows of the other old fashioned. Just because, like you said, in Utah, not going to see a lot of old fashions. In Wisconsin, if you don't see an old fashioned, you might not be in Wisconsin.
Right.
Yeah. Are you sure you're not in Michigan? I think I'm going to cut here just for a very quick break, and then I'm going to get back into, we're kind of going down the list ingredient by ingredient because I have some questions on the cherries, the sugar, the orange, all of it. Yeah, we've got a lot more to talk about. We'll be right back.